Hey everybody, this is Matt. Here in this video I'm going to demonstrate turning on the image stabilization on the Akaso Brave 7 action camera. Okay, you can see this is the Brave 7 here. I'm just simply going to turn it on now. There we go. Okay, now you can see the screen there, and you can see it's set to 4K 30 frames a second. You can see that icon there on the bottom in the center. I'm now simply going to tap it. And you can see 4K 30 frames a second. Okay, perfect. And I'm going to swipe down the menu and now swipe up again. And you can see image stabilization there in the upper center is turned off. So I'm going to tap that and I'm going to swipe up and go with normal. So now we know the image stabilization is turned on, okay? So I'm going to tap that left facing arrow in the upper left and swipe down now. Now our stabilization is on. Perfect. So now I'm going to tap that icon in the bottom center again. Okay, and certainly on this firmware version of this Brave 7, you can see there's an icon in the upper right that looks like a camera with some shake around it, and it's kind of a blue color. If I tap that, okay, maybe I should use my other hand. There we go. It kind of turns to a white color from blue. Okay, now the stabilization is off. So I'm going to tap it again. Okay, now it's blue again. It's kind of a bluish color. But you can see 4K, 30 frames a second. You can see the stabilization is up in the upper right. It's blue. That's good. It's on. So I'm going to swipe through these frame rates and resolutions. And you can see that some of the higher frame rates, we don't have digital stabilization. But, okay, 1080p, 120 frames a second is no stabilization. We can't turn the stabilization on for that frame rate. Okay, so I'm going to keep swiping through. Now we can see 1080p, 60 frames per second. I'm going to tap that icon in the upper right again. Okay, now the stabilization is on again. Okay, and I'm going to swipe through. 1080p, 30 frames a second. Okay, we have stabilization for that. And swipe through again. 720p, 240 frames a second. Nope, we can't turn on the stabilization for that resolution and frame rate. And the same thing for 720p, 120 frames a second. So the higher frame rates are a lot trickier. Now, as you can see, I have my Akaso here mounted on a tripod. So you wouldn't really need the stabilization turned on when it's mounted on a tripod or a mount. But nonetheless, for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just showing you how to turn on the stabilization. So I'm going to now swipe down, and I'm going to tap that icon on the bottom center again, just to show you again. And I'm going to swipe through, all the way through to, let's go all the way to the end at 4K 30 frames a second. Perfect. Now I'm going to swipe down. And I'm going to now show you how to make sure the stabilization's on. So I'm going to swipe up, and you can see image stabilization there in the center is turned off. It's the option that's turned on. Turned off, stabilization is turned on. I hope that made sense. Okay, so it's turned off here on image stabilization. So I'm going to swipe up and switch to normal. Okay, now we'll hit that arrow on the upper left. I'm going to tap that icon in the upper left, the arrow there. And now our stabilization is on at 4K 30 frames a second. So I'm going to swipe down. Perfect. Okay, now one more time, I'm going to tap that icon in the bottom center, on the bottom center of the screen. And how about I swipe through to 1080p 60 frames a second. Okay, so now that's my frame rate and resolution. I'm going to swipe down. That's the frame rate and resolution I've selected. And now I'm going to swipe up. And you can see image stabilization is turned off. Image stabilization there in the center. So I'm going to tap it now to make sure I turn on my image stabilization. So I'm going to now swipe up and set it to normal. It's set to normal. Now I'm going to tap that left facing arrow there in the upper left. And I'm going to swipe back down. We can see our stabilization set to normal. I'm going to swipe back down. And now I'm ready to film at 1080p 60 frames a second with image stabilization on. So remember, select your frame rate and resolution by tapping that icon in the bottom center. And when you've done that, swipe up to make sure your image stabilization is on or off. So under video settings, when you swipe up, you can see image stabilization should be there in the upper portion of the screen, in the center of the upper portion of the screen, and you can see it's set to normal. That means the image stabilization is turned on. Okay, awesome. So, but remember, if it's mounted on a tripod or on a mount, you probably should turn it off, okay? I would kind of recommend, in my opinion, it's best to turn it off. So let's swipe back down, and as I said earlier, we're now ready to film in 1080p 60 frames a second with our digital image stabilization turned on. Oh, and yes, one more thing I almost forgot to mention is that this stabilization and frame rate method only really applies to when you're in video mode. Okay, so remember the icon on the bottom left, there's how we switch between our video modes. And we can go from video to hyperlapse to slow motion video to time-lapse video. Okay, so when you're filming in time-lapse video or hyperlapse video, excuse me, I swiped off the screen there, sort of that. I'm going to tap that icon again. Time-lapse video, for example, I'm going to swipe up. Now we're ready to shoot a time-lapse video. But if you swipe up, you can see that there's no stabilization there, okay? So it only really applies to regular video, which is unfortunate, but I'm going to tap that icon on the bottom left to go back to video. Okay, there we go, perfect. So swipe up, that's video, and currently I have it set to 1080p 60 frames a second. So I'm going to swipe up again, and we can see our image stabilization is turned on. It's set to normal. Okay, but remember, image stabilization only applies to video rather than time lapse or hyperlapse or slow motion. Okay. Okay, so perfect. Have any questions? Feel free to ask them in the comment section. I'll get back to you when I can. I'll answer all I can. And thank you all so very much for watching, and thank you all so very much for your time.